War in the Air, 1910 to 1920. The sky is about to become another battlefield, no less important than the battlefields on land and sea. In order to conquer the air, it is necessary to deprive the enemy of all means of flying, by striking at him in the air, at his bases of operations, or at his production centers. We had better get accustomed to this idea, and prepare ourselves. Giulio Douhet, Italian Staff Officer, 1909. Aviation was a major part of World War I. It marked the beginning of new kinds of war tactics that eventually advanced into a vital part of warfare. But before we can move on to advanced flight, we should first explore the very early years of aviation. The very first successful flight took place on December 7, 1903, so by the time World War I came around, it was still a relatively new idea, and we did not yet know what was possible with the future of aviation. Because the new airplanes during this time were still very dangerous and unpredictable, we explored new ideas for ways of flight, including hot air balloons and zeppelins. Hot air balloons were used a lot during World War I, but were used mainly for observing along the war fronts. However, once artillery began to develop, they became very dangerous and got shot down very easily. Because of this, pilots of the balloons were to take precautionary measures and were given parachutes and tools to help bring the balloon down quickly in the case of an emergency. Zeppelins were also a vital part of World War I, and like hot air balloons, they were used for observation, but later were adapted, by the Germans initially, to drop bombs big enough to level buildings in seconds. In 1914, it was important that aircrafts were to be easy to fly, because the amount of training that pilots received was very minimal. For this reason, aircrafts were designed for stability. By the end of the war, stability had given way to maneuverability. Not only did aircrafts become faster, more maneuverable, and more powerful, but a lot of technologies that were common at the beginning of the war almost disappeared by the end of it. Many of the aircrafts in 1914 had a pusher layout. This is the same layout that the Wright brothers used, where the propeller faced backwards and pushed the aircraft forward. The alternative layout, where the propeller faced forwards and pulled the aircraft back, was called a tractor layout. It provided better performance. But in 1914, visibility was way more important than speed, and so World War I marked the end of the pusher aircraft. Another technology that barely survived the war was the rotary engine. Rotary engines were air-cooled and very light. They provided good power-to-weight ratio, but they could not provide the same power that the heavier inline water-cooled engines could. Even though they stayed in use throughout the war, by 1918 they were basically gone. The fast pace of technological innovation was matched by huge changes in how the aircrafts were used. Before aircrafts, they were only used for observation, and now they were capable of bombing and destroying enemies. The use of bombs in World War I was very important. Bomb raids were constant. Zeppelins were very important in bombing, but because they were so vulnerable to ground fire, planes started to carry and drop bombs as well. Realizing that planes could be used for more than just bombing, they began to change even more. This way, planes were more maneuverable and could be used in combat. Guns and other gadgets were added to planes so that the war in the air between planes could take place. Planes began to travel in groups or packs, and dogfights soon began. With all the dogfights in air combat, war in the air took a brand new meaning. The pilots of fighter planes began to become recognized for their efforts. They were honored, and the really talented ones got recognized even more. The name for these recognized pilots that have shot down 5 or more enemy planes were called aces. But aces and non-aces alike from all around the world took pride in their duties. They wore their uniform with pride, even though it was usually only goggles, a cap, and jacket. They still wore it and honored it. The pilots waited on their war front lines all over France, England, Italy, Ireland, and Germany. They were always ready for the call to help fight and help their countries. The plane did not play the decisive role that it will soon play in later conflicts and wars, but World War I proved their capabilities. It was during this time that key tasks that aircrafts could perform were discovered, experimented with, and fixed a little bit. These things included observation, tactical and strategic bombing, ground attack, and naval warfare. With the growing importance and influence of aircrafts came the need to control the air, and the fighter was born. And by the time World War I was over, the 45 United States Air Service fighter, bomber, and observation squadrons had participated in 7 campaigns, claimed 781 planes, and 73 balloons downed. They produced 71 aces, and more than 5 of those had more than 10 victories each. They dropped 140 tons of bombs in 150 bombing raids, but in exchange, they lost 289 planes, 48 balloons, and 237 of their own men were either killed or missing in action. World War I took a great toll on nations all around the world, but it was a great start for aerial combat in the years and wars still yet to come.